In this video, we'll give an introduction to assemblies, what they are, and how to use them. We'll also cover how to use the AI-assisted assemblies, also known as the Blu Assembly Assistant. Jumping into my account now, and we'll start by talking about what an assembly is. Right now, when I open up a category in my estimate, it's made up of single line items. A single line item is just one description tied to a cost. An assembly, on the other hand, is a line item that's made up of several components that together make up a total cost. For example, I currently have a single line item called drywall materials. But if I wanted to break that down further into the actual materials, like the sheets of drywall, the joint compound, tape, that's where assemblies come in. Some users love assemblies while some don't, and they prefer to work with the single line items. So this is really a personal preference type of feature, but if it suits your way of estimating, great. We'll go ahead and create an assembly for this drywall, and you can start this by going across the description of the line item. On the right-hand side, you'll see a tab in the middle to Build Assembly, which will then open up a side panel for us. Up top is the description, and over to the right is Assembly Unit of Measure. And this is where you tell us how to measure this item overall. We measure drywall in square feet, so I'll type SF. And this also has bearings on how we calculate the materials that go into this assembly. Essentially, what the assembly is going to calculate is how much of each of our assembly items go into one of whatever your unit of measure is, in this case, 1 square foot. Once we know that, it can tell us how much of each of these items we need for 500 square feet or 4,000 or however much. Then I'll start adding the materials that go into my drywall. So the drywall itself, joint compound, and maybe some tape. And across the description, I'm going to change my UOM, or unit of measure, to reflect that these are sheets of drywall that I'm calculating, tubs of joint compound, and rolls of tape. Also, just make sure the types you have listed suit what you're doing. And in this example, it's materials we're calculating, but you can use any of the types listed, and a lot of users like to calculate labor into their assemblies as well. Next, I'll move over to the unit quantity column. This is really where the calculations happen, and by default, it starts with a 1 in the unit quantity. That means the system assumes that for every 1 square foot, you need 1 sheet of drywall. If I change the assembly quantity to 20 square feet, it would say I need 20 sheets of drywall, which isn't correct. So we need to tell it how much of a single sheet of drywall actually goes into 1 square foot. To do this, I'll click on the calculator button, then press C to clear it. In this example, my drywall sheet is 4 by 10, which is 40 square feet in total. I'll divide 1, representing 1 square foot, by 40, the size of the sheet. Then I'll press the equals button to pull in our figure. From there, it gives us this decimal, which tells us how much of that 1 4 by 10 drywall sheet is needed for 1 square foot. Calculating the materials I need does require me to know the size of the items. For example, the number of sheets I need if I'm using 4 by 10 drywall is going to be different if I were to use 4 by 9 sheets. I'll also need to know the coverage area of my tape and the joint compound, which, if you don't know, you can usually find it on the item's packaging or on the supplier's website. Like for my joint compound, I found the type I'll be using, and it specifies that the coverage area is 88 square feet per tub. So I'll do the same math here, 1 divided by 88. If you want to check your work as you go, you can enter a total amount to test it. For example, I'll put in 100 square feet. And it shows that I'll need just over a tub of joint compound for that area. And this point brings me to the UOM Inc column. Inc stands for increments, and this is where you tell the system how the item is actually purchased, whether it's in single units, packs of 2, or other increments. It's also a handy way to get rid of decimals. Like in this example, I can't go to the store and buy 1.1 tubs of joint compound. Even though that's what the calculation says I need, I'll need to buy 2 tubs. By typing 1 into the UOM Inc field, the system rounds the number up to a whole unit. To the left of that is UOM Min. This isn't used as often, but it can be pretty handy. Here, you can set a minimum amount you need to order. For example, if my assembly says I only need a few sheets of drywall, but my supplier requires a minimum order of 5 sheets for me to qualify for free shipping, I can set the UOM min to 5. That way, the system reflects the supplier's minimum order requirement. Then, moving over to the column of unit cost, this is where you'd enter the cost of your materials per sheet, per tub, per roll of tape. And to the right, of course, the total quantities of the materials I'll need, and then the cost of each under the quote total column. Lastly, there's the actuals category column. Most people don't use this, but I'll explain what it does in case it's helpful. When you turn an estimate into a job, all of your estimate costings are transferred into a report called actual costings. And this is where you would log what you actually spent and compare it to your original estimate. Just like in estimate costings, everything in actual costings is organized into categories. For example, the assembly we're working on now is in the drywall category. So in the actual costings report, the assembly items will also appear under the category of drywall. If you leave the actuals category column blank, items will stay in their original categories. But the most common reason to change it is for labor. A lot of users like to include labor in their assemblies, but in the actual costings report, they'd prefer to see all of the labor grouped together in one category. By setting the actuals category to labor, you can make that happen. You can either select from existing categories in the dropdown or create a new one, like for the example of labor. Once the job is created, the system will automatically group those items together into the category you chose. This is optional and again, not something that most users utilize, so unless it's of interest to you, you don't have to mess with changing the actuals category column. Now, if I want to save this assembly for future use in other estimates, I can click Save As on the bottom right. This opens a screen where you can make edits and choose which catalog you want to save this assembly to. The system will automatically pull in the description you've given the assembly so far, and by default, there's a catalog called My Assemblies for anything you create. But you can create your own catalog with a different name, just delete the default and type in a new title. Since we're working in the drywall category of our estimate, the system assumes you'd like to save it under drywall in the catalog. You can change that if you want, or even add a subcategory. For example, you might create a subcategory called Ultra Thin Drywall, or anything else that helps you organize your assemblies more clearly. If you're not interested in saving the assembly for future use, or once you've finished saving it to your catalog, you can click Close to return to the estimate costing screen. Back in your estimate, you'll see that assemblies are easy to spot. They have a blue tab beside them. For example, the line item above our assembly doesn't have the blue tab. Also, once you press Save, the assembly's description text turns blue as well. And with anything in Build Exact, if it's blue, it's clickable, so if you need to go back into the assembly to review or make changes, just click on the description or the blue tab beside it and you're back in. If I'm working in a different estimate and I want to use the assembly I just saved, I'll head over to the Assemblies tab on the right-hand side. Since I saved this in my Assemblies catalog, I can either type in the keyword in the search bar or scroll until I find it. Once you've found the one you want, click it and the system will ask you which category in your estimate you'd like to drop it into. Now, if you ever want to edit your saved assemblies, you can do that from the Catalogs tab on the left-hand side. Inside My Assemblies, everything is listed under the Items tab. From there, you can click into any assembly to update it or delete it if you don't need it anymore. So that's how to build assemblies from scratch. Next, we'll take a look at the Blu Assembly Assistant, which is a huge time saver. This tool uses AI, so instead of building an assembly piece by piece, you can just describe the work you want in the prompt box. It'll also give you some suggested prompts based on the category you're in. Since I'm in drywall, it's showing drywall-related suggestions. I can click one of these and tweak it, or just type in my own. You'll also see recent prompts, which is super handy if you want to reuse the same ones, and if you have go-to prompts, you can save them as favorites for quick access. If you're connected to suppliers, the assistant will use their product data and pricing. If not, it uses generic pricing, which you can edit however you like. The real benefit here is that it does all the math for you, figuring out the quantities automatically. And before you hit generate items, make sure you've put in the measurement or use the takeoff tool so it knows how much material to calculate for you. Once you click generate, it takes your prompt and breaks it down into items. Next, it figures out the quantities, like how many sheets of drywall you need. Finally, it pulls the prices either from your suppliers or from the generic data. The output will also include assumptions, and we always recommend giving those a quick check. For example, I didn't tell it what size drywall I wanted, so it's going to make its best guess. If that's not what I need, no problem. I can just adjust the prompt and regenerate to get a new result. Once you've got your results, you can finalize them in one of two ways. You can add the items in as single line items, which works fine, but I prefer the assembly option for two reasons. First, it stores all the assumptions and notes, which is handy if you need to come back to it later. And by the way, even if you build your own assemblies from scratch, you can leave notes for yourself, which just makes it easier when you reuse them. Secondly, saving the Blu Assembly Assistant's results as an assembly makes them more reusable. If this is useful for future estimates, I can save that assembly in my catalog for future use. I know we just went over a lot of information, but as always, if you have any questions, please let us know.